think sometimes when you're raising a child, it's like, I got time. Like, And the funny thing is, like, right now it's cute. It's kind of like it makes you smile a little bit, like, look at you, you upset. In 10 years, it won't be cute at all. And so as a parent, like, where am I operating with urgency around the way I'm raising my children so that they can become the people, the humans that the Creator intends for them to be? Like, my wife and I have a purpose of stewardship that requires that we are moving with the urgency around how they are raised, disciplined, guided, and educated. And I'll share stories of that with you guys, right? Urgency. Like, am I moving with urgency? There's a quote by Hazel Lee that says, I held a moment in my hand, brilliant as a star, fragile as a flower, a tiny sliver of 1 hour. I dropped it carelessly. Oh God, I knew not I held an opportunity. I knew not I held an opportunity. Benjamin Franklin said, you may delay, but time will not, and lost time is never found again. So if we're going to have a conversation about time, I believe then that we need to have a conversation about death. Now, I need you to commit to something. Like, stick with me through the whole part of this conversation. Like, if you just heard that part, like, you're going to notice, some folks are going to notice, like, your phone's going to ring, a text message is going to come in. Because one of the things I've learned as someone who operates to transform other people's lives, a person whose purpose is to support individuals in living their best life, that humans have a way of avoiding the thing that will drive them towards where they're supposed to go, right? And that avoidance comes from everything around us, right? So just notice, if you heard that, I need you to commit to listening to this full part, like not the whole hour, but just this portion right here where I talk about the denial of death. Because for a lot of you, there's going to be something in you that wants to pull you from this conversation, because part of the denial of death is not talking about it.
If you want to be about it, come on, let's talk about it. Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibilities. Find your power, passion, and your purpose. You know it's time for you to walk in greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dreams. Now, inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live a dream. Your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals.
Now, when I say the word procrastination, most of us have a relationship with that word. We have a relationship with procrastination in some capacity of our lives. And the problem for most of us is we don't know how to overcome that. We have no idea. For the areas in life where we procrastinate, many of us have no idea how to overcome it. And that's what I want to talk about. How do we overcome, or how do we defeat the places that procrastination has reigned in our lives? And I say it reigns in our lives because for some of us, procrastination has complete sovereignty. Like, wrap your mind around that. Like, complete sovereignty in your life. And I remember there was a point in my life where procrastination had complete sovereignty over me. I mean, talk about a yoke. And when you think about a yoke is something that you put on an ox. So one of the world's strongest animals, and one of the ways that a human can control one of the world's strongest animals, an animal that can literally plow a field all day. I mean, all day long. And how does a human control it? Puts a yoke on it. And once a human puts a yoke on an ox, that ox basically is at the human's will. Go forward, go forward. Back up, back up. Go right, go right. Go left, go left. So when I say some of us have a yoke of procrastination on our necks, that's how you're living your life. Procrastination says stop, you stop. Procrastination says slow down, you slow down. Procrastination says go left, you go left. Got a yoke. And I've been thinking deeply about how to support people with breaking this yoke. Like, how do you break this yoke? How do we annihilate the yoke? And the piece that's come up for me in thinking about that is urgency. The reason why many of us procrastinate is because we have a misplaced sense of urgency. And here's why I say misplaced. Because we are urgent in some matters. Let the latest and greatest shoe come out. Urgency. Oh, I gotta get it and get it. Right? Like, I'm urgent about that. Let there be some kind of event, like urgency for a new outfit. And for most of us, we live an externally driven life, and our urgency is externally driven as well. And the only time we get urgent about life is when we're in crisis. Oh, the doctor said my cholesterol is too high. If I continue to eat the way I'm going to eat, I'll have a heart attack. Crisis. And then all of a sudden, it's like, okay. And that's what I want to talk about today. Like, how do we develop a healthy sense of urgency well before things go sideways? Like, how does one awaken to the urgency of their life in a healthy way? How does one awaken to the urgency of their lives in a healthy way? So, as I was thinking about this quote came to mind. It's a quote by Confucius. And Confucius says that we all have two lives. And the second one begins when we realize we only have one. Let that sink in for a second. Confucius, right? We all have two lives. And the second one begins when we fully begin to realize that we only have one. Like, wait a second, I get one shot. I don't get to continue to play this game for however long I want to play the game. I got one shot at this. And here's the thing, like many of us, we already intuitively know we only have one life. But according to Robert Greene, when you read the book, The Laws of Human Nature, almost every human being on the planet is in denial of their death. It's just not something you think about. People don't even like to talk about it. As a matter of fact, folks will turn this off if I stay on the subject of death too long. They'd be like, oh, he's being depressed. He's being depressing this morning. It's like, am I being depressing, or am I talking about the reality that most of us are in denial of? in the avoidance of the conversation, most of us then go on to live complacent, chaotic lives. Like, I'm going to give you a second to absorb that one. Complacent and chaotic. And here's what I mean by that. Your complacency creates the chaos. Because there's things that you know you should have handled that aren't handled. And because you've been complacent, they become chaotic. And the only time you have urgency is when your life is in crisis. So another way to put this is that at some point you will operate with urgency. The question is, will the urgency be internally sourced or will the urgency be externally sourced? Like, you have to choose. This morning, I'm hoping that upon listening to this, you choose internal urgency. Because I believe that when we choose internal urgency, it actually helps us avoid external crisis. So I did a show. By the way, we're still going to put the list out. We've been taking our time for a number of reasons. Folks on my team don't see it as urgently as I do, right? I'm like, this is urgent. What are you doing? Like, this, I can't drop this, right? Speaking of urgency. But the list will come out. But regardless of the list, some of the things I talked about on that show, which was the beginning of February at this point. But we just found out in the first quarter, it was by far the most popular show, right? And why was it the most popular show? Because when we think about life and death, when we think about health and sickness, it creates urgency. So people are willing to actually put time to the side to listen to something they believe will ultimately save their lives and keep them out of crisis. Here's the problem. That level of urgency is external. So what I did is I created external urgency. And if you don't have internal urgency, then you will listen to it, get excited about it, and do absolutely nothing. Now, isn't that scary? I'll give you some examples. There's some folks that heard me say Teflon is poisonous and still cook on Teflon. There's no urgency. Not until there's crisis, right? Not until the doctor says something's wrong, and then it's throw them all out. Throw all the pots and pans out, right? Not until there's external crisis do we get urgent about what it is that we know. There's some folks, we talked about the dangers of toxic toothpaste. We talked about the dangers of toxins in the food. Yesterday, on my Instagram and Facebook story, I just went into a mode. I'm just going to post some stuff to wake folks up. How awful McDonald's fries are, right? All the stuff that's in it. Just a reminder, right? And then when we get reminded, all of a sudden there's a sense of urgency. Oh, yeah. These vegetable seed oils are bad for me. Now there's a sense of urgency. But why does it have to always be externally driven? And that's really what we're going to get underneath today. How do you get to a point where the urgency that is around you is actually internal versus external? Confucius says, we all have two lives, and the second one begins the moment we realize we only have one. So, how do you feel this morning? Do you feel like you're living your life with urgency? If you were to rank on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no urgency at all, 10 being with extreme urgent patience. I'll get to that in a minute. What is urgent patience? But with extreme urgent patience, that being 10, where do you rank this morning? Where do you fall? when it comes to urgency, where exactly are you playing your game? Now, what I like to do is let's talk about what urgency actually is. Like, I want to make sure that we actually understand this concept of urgency. Because one of the things I believe that happens with us, especially with the English language, is that we have these words that we intuitively get in conversation, but then, like, in terms of how it actually applies, in terms of how it actually moves, like, we're a bit lost on it. And the reason I believe that is because if we fully understood, then I believe it would actually create a different level of action in our lives, a different level of urgency in our lives. And so when I think about this idea of how do we understand urgency, then what comes to mind is that we have to understand where urgency comes from. And I believe there are two types of urgency. One that is self-created, that is like a state of mind, like this is urgent, and then one that is externally created. So let me give you a few examples of what I mean. When I live an externally driven life, and when I say externally driven, I mean my urgency is externally driven, like everything is externally driven. Like I'm always, it depends on what's happening around me in terms of how I show up and what I'm doing. When I live this way, what happens is I'm constantly bombarded with feelings of anxiety and shame. If you ever wonder why you feel the way you feel, I'll get notes from individuals that listen to the broadcast, and they'll say, I feel like I've wasted my time. I feel like I'm hearing this too late. And the reason you're feeling that way is because every Sunday, I'm looking to drive a sense of urgency about your life. And then what that will do for some of us, it will actually bring up feelings of anxiety because there's a lack of clarity about life. By the way, this is healthy anxiety. Like, the reason you feel unsettled is because there's something in your spirit telling you, hey, something needs to be done. Something needs to be done. And the problem is now we have so many ways to escape that feeling. Like some folks feel it and they say, woo, I need a drink. Like, that means it's time to drink. Like, I don't like, I need a drink. Well, you don't understand. This is just how I kind of come down from my day. Like, and it's like, no, it's not how you come down from your day. It's how you cloud out the urgency. It's how you cloud out the anxiety because you're wasting life. You're wasting your time. And one of the reasons you need a after-work drink is because you realize that, you spent 8 to 10 hours doing something for somebody else that has nothing to do with your life's purpose. And so then you come home and you feel unsettled. And so you got to sip it away or smoke it away or pop it away. When I say pop it, pop pills, like, pop it away. Like, I take 2 of these for my anxiety. And the problem with that is there'll come a time where there ain't enough drink. There'll come a time where there ain't enough smoke or there's not enough pills. to push the feeling out, and you got to deal with it. And the question is, you willing to deal with it now? Or are you going to deal with it later? Are you going to procrastinate? So these feelings of anxiety and shame, and by the way, the shame comes from all the things that I know I should have done that I haven't done. And I'm holding myself accountable to all the ideas that I've ever had that I've never executed on. And when I think about all the opportunities that I've blown, a sense of shame comes over me. Again, this is healthy. This is how we were designed. This is, in some ways, the incentive that the Creator put inside of us to get to work. To get to work. And you have a choice. And the choice is you can do the best that you can to drown it out, which is only temporary. Or you can begin to do God's work and actually replace it with the feelings of complete fulfillment. It's up to you. The feelings of shame and anxiety that many of us struggle with are nothing more than the consequence of ignoring your life's purpose. That's what it is. It's the consequence of ignoring your life's purpose. I have a lot of folks who often may go through the purpose course. They're like, well, I thought I distinguished my purpose, but I'm not sure. It's like, well, one of the ways to know for sure is after you distinguish it, if all of a sudden, because you're not doing it or because you don't believe it, you feel just a bit more unsettled. I was hanging with one of my buddies, and he was like, Linnell, man, a lot of folks avoid you. He was like, I'm like, hey, I'm about to go hang with Linnell. And they was like, oh, I'm not in a place to see him right now. He's like, why not? He's like, man, I hang around that brother, it makes me feel like I'm not doing anything. He was like, man, told one of my buddies to come with me. They were like, nah, man, he makes me, I feel like, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And it's like, no, it's not me that makes you feel that way. It's not me that makes you feel that way. That's with you regardless of whether I'm around or not. It's just my way of being and what I believe and how I move. What it does is it brings a focus. It makes it emanate a bit more. And the reason why is because whenever you're around someone who's living their life fully, who's taking chances, who's pushing, and you're not, then yeah, that sense of shame and anxiety will show up. Not because you're supposed to be doing what they're doing, but because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So, how do we get to a point where we can actually adopt, actually move with a consistent sense of urgency? I came across the story of Noah. I'm sorry, not Noah, Jonah. Two different characters. One listened, one didn't. Right? Noah listened. And imagine this, right? Most of us don't have this kind of urgent patience. Can you imagine having the urgent patience that when you're given your purpose, it actually takes 300 years to come to fruition? Most of us don't. Most of us would be like, well, I guess it ain't happening. After year one, I guess it's not happening. I don't have the same urgent patience to build this boat. Most of us would be like, looking up at the sky, I don't see any. I don't know if we have to work today. I don't think that we should, hey, can we take off? Yeah, I think we can kick it today. I don't see any signs that it's going to do what the Creator said it was going to do. Like if you were Noah, would the boat ever been built? If your purpose was to build a boat, would the boat ever be built? It's just like, are you operating with a sense of urgency? A sense of urgency that's grounded in faith, that as I build, the waters will come. See, because what happened is, in that story, the waters came and a lot of people were in crisis. And because they hadn't listened to the urgency of Noah's message, their crisis went unresolved. I don't know about you. That's not where I want to be this morning, especially with the way the world looks right now. Okay? Especially with what's going on in the world now. Countries shooting missiles at other countries. One country getting into border battles with another. Another country responding with missiles. We're in a time that if you can't feel it, there is an external crisis coming. And if you're not handling the work that you should be handling with patient urgency right now, the crisis is going to catch you unprepared. So anyway, let's talk about this brother Jonah. I like this idea. I like the story of Jonah, because the story of Jonah in many ways helps us understand why it's so important that we pursue our life's purpose. And so here we have Jonah. Jonah calls himself a man of God, right? Like, he calls himself a good guy. And Jonah is doing the best that he can, quote unquote, to be living within the guardrails of his purpose. And then he receives an assignment in alignment with his purpose. And for biblical scholars, I apologize. I'm not going to go into all the details. This is like a summary, right? Because, folks, the right men be like, you missed this. It's just a little summary, okay? And so, Jonah gets this assignment and decides that he doesn't want to take it. So the Creator gives him an assignment and decides that he doesn't want to take it. And part of the reason that he doesn't take it is because, in terms of how he feels about the assignment, he doesn't have a personal sense of urgency. I don't care about those folks. As a matter of fact, those people are pretty bad. Right? He has judgments about the individuals that reside in Nineveh. Not going to do that. Have no urgency for them. Whatever happens to them, happens to them. But what Jonah forgot was that this was his assignment. This was his purpose. And when you don't align with your purpose, you get overtaken by feelings of shame and anxiety. In one part of the story, Jonah is chilling, like literally chilling. And this is most of us, right? We know there's something that we should be doing, and we've decided that we're not doing it. And like Jonah, we are sitting in the shade of our patio watching television. That's not what he was doing, but you get my point, right? Procrastinating, knowing that I'm supposed to be doing something, but this feels much better. I believe how the story goes is Jonah was sitting under a plant that had given him shade, like he was literally chilling. And then, as a warning, as a little warning that, hey, you probably should get on your assignment, the plant was eaten. Think about this. The plant was eaten, and it lost its life, and he got uncomfortable. And this is what happens. Like, you're watching television. You can't even concentrate because you got that feeling inside you like, I really should be doing this over there, but I really don't want to do that. And then you might even go to the little cabinet, your little cabinet up top, and get, that little drink that makes you feel better, and you pour it, and I'm just gonna sit down for another. I just need an hour. It's been a long week. And we tell ourselves stories, to escape urgency. So Jonah, I imagine he did something similar, right? But now you can't chill. Now you can't be comfortable. So what did Jonah do? If I can't chill, I'm going to run from it. And that's what many of us do. We'll go, well, it's a little difficult for me to fulfill on that. I'm experiencing resistance. That must not be for me. Or I'm having a hard time figuring out how I'm supposed to do it. So that must not be for me. And so we go in a different direction. We go get a job. We go back to school. Like we have all these ways, and by the way, we'll get validation from everybody else that it's the right thing. So I'm gonna go back now and get my MBA. Like, oh, that's good, right? You're like, oh, that's okay. That's really good. And we'll use that to fan out the anxiety and the shame we feel for not doing what we know we're supposed to be doing. But then we wonder why that doesn't work. See, because in the story of Jonah, Jonah goes to run and he gets on a boat to get far away. But see, what happens is when you hang out with people that are running, things get chaotic. That's why you got to be careful who you're around. Because I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be on the boat with Jonah. I don't want to be on the boat with somebody that's avoiding their purpose. I don't want to hang out with folks that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Because when you aren't doing what you're supposed to be doing, that's when chaos comes. And a lot of us, the one thing I appreciate about Jonah, he took accountability. Oh, you know what? I'm not living my purpose. It's my fault, y'all. But here's how it goes for most folks. They'll show up at church and actually stand up and say, I need y'all to pray for me. There's so much chaos in my life. I need you to pray that the chaos goes away, not even realizing that the chaos has been self-created because you have disobeyed your assignment. Whew, man. So Jonah is on the boat sleeping while all his friends are experiencing the chaos of his behavior. You got to be careful who you hang out with. You got to be careful who you call friend. You got to be careful who you ride with, because they were riding with this guy. Some of us would be in the passenger seat and be like, why was I in an accident with them? The accident was about them, not you. Hey, Linnell, you want to ride with me? No, I'll follow you. I'm going to ride in my own vehicle. I'm not sure that you're fully aligned. Or better yet, I'll drive your car. Man. He's asleep. They wake him up. Yo, man, it's crazy. Oh, that's my fault. Hey, at least he owned it. Yeah, you know what? That's my fault. That's my fault. And then they were so good, he was like, throw me over. They're like, nah, man. No, man. It may not be you. It may be somebody else. And so they pulled lots. Back in the day, that was an old school way. That was an old school way of allowing the fate of the lots to determine who was wrong. And they believed it. They believed it so much that it actually showed them who was wrong. Guess who pulled the shortest lot? Jonah. I just want you to think about something before we go into the next hour. Is it possible that the chaos that you've been experiencing is self-sourced? Is it possible that because you've been avoiding the urgency of your assignment, the urgency of your goals, that the reason you're sick is your fault? Is it possible that the reason your relationship is falling apart is your fault? Is it possible that the reason your finances are in such bad shape is your fault? Is it possible that the chaos you're experiencing at work is your fault? I think sometimes we believe that, we're so spiritual that, everything that's happening around us is everybody else's fault. But it's like, but are you completely 100% following your spiritual assignments? Is it your fault? Is the reason your church not growing your fault? Are there things that you were told to do that you haven't done because the excuse is, I didn't know how to do it? When what you were supposed to do was take the first step on faith, but you didn't, and now things are chaotic. Is it your fault? The clock is ticking. The average lifespan of a human being is 80 years. And for some of us, the reason we feel the way we feel is because we inherently know we've already crossed the halfway mark and we haven't done our work. You haven't done it. You haven't gone to the places that you intended to go. Had somebody reach out to me about Ghana. Like, I could go this year, but I'll go next year. It's like this is what we do, right? And it's like, I hope we can go next year, right? Because remember, there were folks that said that in 2019, I'm going to go with you in 2020. We couldn't go. What was happening in the world didn't allow us to go. Now, we were blessed to go in 2021 and 2022 and 2023, but sometimes we count on what's happening tomorrow. Like tomorrow is guaranteed. And you might be here, but things could be vastly different. Folks ask me, why you do the things you do? Like, man, I was at my brother Brady's house this past Sunday. He was like, gorillas, bro? I'm like, look, man, you hang out with humans. There's nothing as unpredictable as a human being. You think the folks that went to work the morning of a workplace shooting thought that was going to happen? They thought they were going to be, in some type of adversity like that. But some human that completely missed their purpose, completely missed their assignment, got all unpredictable and went sideways. But you want to talk to me about a gorilla that is following their assignment? That has no choice but to follow the assignment? That has predictable social behaviors? Why do I do it? Because I get the point that I've already likely crossed the halfway point of life, and I want to experience it fully. I don't want to have any regrets. And I realize that these are opportunities for me to get closer to the Creator by witnessing what He's done, by witnessing His majesty, by witnessing what He's created. It's an opportunity for me to examine my own fears about what he's asking me to do next. By pushing myself, even when I'm afraid, to do things that are rational, but feel irrational because of my interpretations. Unfortunately, many of us feel the pressure of urgency right on the edge of loss. Oh my goodness, my spouse is sick and gonna lose their life. I need to spend more time with them. Like right on the edge of loss. Oh my goodness, my health is waning. I know I should have been eating better. Then all of a sudden, all the discipline, all the things you should have been doing, you begin to do because you're right on the edge of loss. Oh my goodness, it's becoming difficult for me to stand up and sit down. You go to the doctor, like, yeah, well, you know, your muscles are in atrophy. Well, what do I do? Well, if you just want to be able to stand up and sit down by yourself, you at least need to work out. I was talking to a gentleman at the gym who walks around the gym with a cane. He said, man, I admire you because you're here. He was like, I wish I did this when I was your age. I wouldn't have this cane. But he's in there now because he won't be able to walk with the cane unless he goes in every day and walks. Now there's a sense of urgency. Urgency. Most of our urgency is driven by the fear of loss. Why are we fear-driven? What if your urgency was internally driven by the anticipation of gain? Most of us say we believe in the promise. Our actions don't necessarily line up. I think sometimes when you're raising a child, it's like, I got time. Like, you know. And the funny thing is, like, right now it's cute. It's kind of like it makes you smile a little bit, like, look at you, you upset. You know, in 10 years, it won't be cute at all. And so as a parent, like, where am I operating with urgency around the way I'm raising my children so that they can become the people, the humans that the Creator intends for them to be? Like, my wife and I have a purpose of stewardship that requires that we are moving with the urgency around how they are raised, disciplined, guided, and educated. And I'll share stories of that with you guys, right? Urgency. Like, am I living, am I moving with urgency? There's a quote by Hazel Lee that says, I held a moment in my hand, brilliant as a star, fragile as a flower, a tiny sliver of 1 hour. I dropped it carelessly. Oh God, I knew not I held an opportunity. I knew not I held an opportunity. Benjamin Franklin said, you may delay, but time will not, and lost time is never found again. So if we're going to have a conversation about time, I believe then that we need to have a conversation about death. Now, I need you to commit to something. Like, stick with me through the whole part of this conversation. Like, if you just heard that part, like, you're going to notice, some folks are going to notice, like, your phone's going to ring, a text message is going to come in. Because one of the things I've learned as someone who operates to transform other people's lives, a person whose purpose is to support individuals in living their best life, that humans have a way of avoiding the thing that will drive them towards where they're supposed to go, right? And that avoidance comes from everything around us, right? So just notice, if you heard that, I need you to commit to listening to this full part, like not the whole hour, but just this portion right here where I talk about the denial of death. Because for a lot of you, there's going to be something in you that wants to pull you from this conversation, because part of the denial of death is not talking about it, not listening to it, not being in conversation about it, but completely avoiding it. This is why so many people die without life insurance. Not because they didn't know it existed, because they were in denial of their own deaths. And not just them, but all the folks around them. Nobody checked in on them and said, what's going to happen when you're gone? What's going to happen when you're gone? And one of the ways that you know the gradient in the mentality of where a person is their ability to actually engage in conversations about death. Once again, I was with my brother Brady, and we were talking about death. This is why I'm with him, because we can have the conversation. Folks might wonder, like, who does Linnell hang around? I hang around folks that can be in these kind of conversations, because these are the kind of conversations I want to be in. The conversations that remind me of my mortality. But the reason so many of us move without urgency is because we forget that we're mortal. We forget that each moment is bought. And at any point, we can be turned from the register. Like, it's over. No more time for purchases. So we forget that. And because we forget that, we're operating in our lives with a certain mediocrity and a certain complacency that we should not be operating with. So I want to read a couple of things to you that I read years ago that really changed how I think about my life. So Stoicism, I talked about defining Stoicism and the role of Stoicism. There's a push against Stoicism these days. And it would make sense that there's a push against Stoicism, because what folks want you to do now is live in the moment. Like, live in this moment. And one of the philosophies of Stoicism is that you actually think about your death. You actually take time to be silent and to consider every aspect of life. The opportunity to be sad, the opportunity to be happy, the opportunity to live, and the reality that you will die. See, because if you are practicing this, then it's difficult for you to engage in some of the foolishness that folks are engaging in nowadays, right? So that's why there's a push to be like, oh, that's just. Seneca said, who is the author of Stoicism, said, of all people, only those are at leisure who make time for philosophy. Only they truly live. Listen to this. Because, you know, they'll cause you to think about this differently. Like, Linnell not truly living because he don't kick it, he don't party. And what I'm telling you is the person that has to party every weekend, they're not truly living. They're blocking something out. Of all people, only those are at leisure who make time for philosophy, for thinking, for questioning. Only they truly live. Not satisfied to merely keep good watch over their own days, they annex every age to their own. All the harvest of the past is added to their store. So the idea that I get silent, the idea that I stop, the idea that I actually check in, the idea that I'm questioning myself, the idea that I'm actually in process around who I am and what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. And see, when you pause and you self-reflect, there's something about that, this is why folks don't have time to do it, by the way, that actually begins to drive a sense of urgency. It creates a sense of urgency. But the other thing that creates a sense of internal urgency is having a clear perception of death. And the reason a clear perception of death connects to the urgency of life is because when you know this could be your last day, it makes you spend the day differently. It makes you think about how you spend your time differently. Some time ago, after Robert Greene wrote The Laws of Human Nature, I grabbed the book. It's a big, thick, it's a big one. And I was like, I respect Robert Greene and his writing. One of the only reasons I made it to corporate America is because of one of his books. And so when he drops books, I'm like, I'll read it. And so I grabbed the book and I began to read it. In the very last chapter of the book, by the way, this is one of those 600-page books that most folks don't have time. Like, I don't have time, right? They don't have time to read. But sometimes slowing down and reading things like this is philosophy, right? Another part of Stoicism. Sometimes sitting and reading someone's philosophy on the laws of human nature will make you better at being human. So Robert Greene says this on page 578 of the book, The Laws of Human Nature, if you have the book. Second paragraph. By connecting to the reality of death, we connect more profoundly to the reality in the fullness of life. Let me say that again. By connecting to the reality of death, the fact that I will die. So here's the thing, like, most of us spend our lives, quote unquote, avoiding death. But not really. Linnell, I can't believe you scuba dive. That's crazy. I can't believe you drive every day. That's crazy, right? Like, the things that we think, because it's outside my comfort zone, is crazy. But don't you realize you do things every day that are in your comfort zone that can lead to death? Like, do we realize this? I think sometimes we don't. Like, look at the statistics in terms of the death of scuba divers and the death of car drivers. Like, sometimes we'll be like, ooh, that's crazy. And it's like, no, we pretty much do crazy stuff all the time. Like, we get on large cylinders with hundreds of other people, strap ourselves in, and then take off and fly through the air. That's crazy. And by the way, because it's in your comfort zone, you do it without sometimes ever thinking of your mortality. But then somebody says, oh my goodness, I'm going to go on a tiger safari, and we go, you crazy. Well, how many people get eaten on safari? Right, again, let's look at the stats. Is it crazy? Or do we have such a misconception of death that we believe that we're controlling the likelihood that we will die? Like, I think some of us actually believe. I got a buddy who, like, when you get in his car, it takes him about 5 minutes to take off. We all know somebody like that, right? You get in his car, He does everything he needs to do, adjust the radio, the music got to be just right, this, gets the GPS situated, adjusts his, I swear he adjusts his seat like 3 or 4 times, make sure it's right. Then he finally puts on the seatbelt. By the way, I'm just sitting there looking at him. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he was like, man, driving's dangerous. And I respect that. I respect that. You know what I'm saying? He's like, driving's dangerous. And I'm like, okay. And then we'll take off, and he drives slow. And I'm like, you don't think driving in this lane, in this slow lane, that everybody flying past you is dangerous? Do you realize that somebody could fly right into the back of you while you're going your 55 miles an hour? Whatever, man. I'm just going to stay right here. Right? But like in his mind, he has conquered the possibility that something will happen to him while he drives. And by the way, I appreciate that, right? He's not pushing the envelope, etc. At the same time, the statistics are pretty much the same, right? So Robert Greene says, by connecting to the reality of death, we connect more profoundly to the reality and fullness of life. So when I'm clear that I can die, I tend to live a fuller life. When I avoid the thought of death, I tend to live a less fulfilled life. And then he goes on to say, by separating death from life and repressing our awareness of it, we do the opposite. Matter of fact, let me read this too. There's another highlighted part on page 577. He says, objects that have aged, films from the past, unconsciously remind us of the shortness of life and the fate that awaits us. We find ways to avoid them, to surround ourselves with what is new, fresh, and trending. You ever wonder why we're so drawn to the latest and the greatest? Is because if you're not drawn to it, you actually have to sit with what is worn and old and dying. You actually have to sit with the idea that things decay, including you. So we find ways to avoid them. We surround ourselves with what is new, fresh, and trending. And some people have even come to entertain the idea that through technology, we can somehow overcome death. Like there are folks out there who are like, we're getting close. I think that our generation might just escape it. No, you're not. No, you're not. He then goes on to say in this chapter, by the way, I believe this is the most powerful chapter in the book. It's a phenomenal book. One of the most powerful chapters in the book, because he then goes on to say that one of the main reasons that people don't create, that people don't do what they know they should do, is because they deny their impending death and they purposely look away from the clock that they know is ticking. If you have breath in your lungs, it's not too late. And the anxiety you feel about what it is that you intend to do, the anxiety you feel about your purpose, the anxiety you feel about what you should do, is a healthy one. It is trying to push you. It is trying to push you to take action. It's not time to go to the doctor and get medication. It's not time for another drink. It's not time for a better smoke. It's time to get into action. It's time to take the experience you've been putting off. It's time to go the place you've been afraid to go. When we were in Uganda, I asked the leaders that were there, I asked them, I said, like, what did you feel when we got off the plane? All of them talked about the sense of anxiety, not knowing what came next. See, this is what we avoid. We want this sense of assurity. Like, we want to avoid uncertainty so much that we fool ourselves into believing that the next moment is certain. The next moment is not certain. You have an idea, you have a story that it is, because every Sunday I do the show, we always end at 9 o'clock. So then I say, well, then I'm guaranteed the next 32 minutes to end the show. But there's no certainty in that. There's no certainty in that. Anyone could walk through that door, a disgruntled employee. Like, so many things can happen where we feel so certain about things, when in fact, every moment we're given is a gift. And it's a gift that was given by design, so we use that time to execute on our reason for being. So that way, when the uncertainty of death shows up, you can face it. You can face it with a deep resolve, knowing that I have fully dedicated my life to the Creator. I have fully dedicated my life to my purpose. I have lived from what many people is multiple lives. I tell my wife that all the time. It's like, I feel like I've had multiple lives. I feel like I've been blessed to have like all these different lives because of the experiences, because I was willing to live fully. There is no regret when you hear the call of the grave, because it's coming. Robert Greene goes on to say, make the awareness of death visceral. Out of fear, we convert death into an abstraction, a thought we can entertain now and then or repress. But life is not about a thought. It is a flesh and blood reality, something we feel from within. There is no such thing as life without death. One of the reasons many of us are not fully living is because we have not taken on the full perspective of what life truly is. You cannot fully comprehend life unless you can actually be with the thought of death. Just recently, I was having a thought about looking at my goals, and there's a goal I've had for years, and it's to get Lessons to Teach My Son published, right? And we've been having some trouble with that, different things, and I'm like, okay. Then I realized, like, man, I got to get this thing outside of me. I got to hire other people because, like, as I thought about it, I'm like, the reason I put that out is because if something happens to me, my son has something to go on. Right. And I realize that if I'm alive, then that also means that death can be right around the corner. And I cannot allow that to catch me without the book being published. So I'm like, now I'm calling folks like, hey, okay, what does it look like for you to support me on this project? Like, how can we get this done? Give me a quote. Let's figure it out. Hey, what's your quote for this? Right now, I'm lining them up because that sense of urgency hit me like, wait a second. Like, you like to think that you have time. Oh, my son is only 6, right? But to fully live is to constantly keep the idea that death is coming in your mind. So now there's a sense of urgency around the book. Let's get this done. Like, this needs to get done. If not for me, one of the people I was talking to was like, look, man, as they were looking at the manuscript, they're like, yo, this ain't just for your son. Like, you got to get this out for people. And I'm like, well, whatever it is, what's driving the urgency is my son. And then however it helps other people, phenomenal. But what drove the urgency? The fact that I know one day I won't be here, and I don't want that day to come without that book being out. Urgent. So it makes it urgent. It makes it urgent. I was reading this book about the experiences of people on their deathbed. Yeah, we're still having a conversation. I know folks are like, we're going to keep talking about this. And one of the things that it talked about was the perspective of people who defined their life as fully living and the perspective of those who defined their lives as wasted. And the turmoil that those on their deathbed felt as they were passing away, who had not fully lived their lives, like the author was like, it was difficult to measure. Like you could feel it. Like you could feel the vibration of regret in the room. You can look into the eyes and see the regret in their eyes. You can sense it in their tone. Like think about how devastating it would be to be laying on your deathbed feeling that way. Like already looking death in the eye, and you're feeling like I didn't spend this life the way I was supposed to. In contrast to the people who had the experiences. And one of the questions that this author would ask those who had the experiences is he would say, how much would you pay? Like, tell me your top experience in life. One of your top experiences. And they would share these opportunities that they almost talked themselves out of. Right? They would share like, oh, well, maybe I won't do that because I almost didn't do it because it scared me. But now, in this position, this vulnerable position, where death has his yoke around them, and he says, when you think about that experience, what would you pay to have that experience again? And typically, they say, I would give everything I have. That experience was so wonderful. Like, I want you to think about that. Like, have you lived a life where you've had experiences that were so wonderful that if you could go back to have that experience, you would give your entire savings? Like, I would give my entire savings for that. And here's the thing. Most people can't think of an experience like that because they're not fully living. There's nothing I would get my whole savings for. Are you kidding me? That's because the parties ain't that dope. That's because, like, kicking it every Friday night ain't that dope. But if you go back to the experience, like for some of you that you had in Ghana, like I imagine you would say, yeah, I would pay 2, 3, 4 times what I paid to go back there and have that experience again if it was going to be my last experience. I think about the leaders who went to Uganda and the leaders who bowed out and the leaders who went. I imagine they would say, yeah, I paid a lot of money, but I would pay double that, triple that if I knew I could only have like one experience. You can only have one experience again. It's like I would have that. I would go in. I would have that experience again. I would pay everything I have to have that experience again. Are you living that way? Are you living that way? Are you having moments that take your breath away? One of the things that supports us in driving urgency is actively creating new and meaningful experiences. But see, the problem with new and meaningful experiences is that often these are the things that scare us the most. That time you actually stepped out on faith and created an event that you had to kick off, that you had to be the point person for, where you stood on that stage, but you remember the fear? And the problem is the urgency to have the experience doesn't come until we can't have the experience anymore. I remember years ago, I went to Peru to see Machu Picchu. And one of the opportunities that they give you is, well, they don't give it anymore, right? So like they don't give you this. This is the thing. A lot of times we're like, oh my goodness, I can wait. I'll do it next year. One of the opportunities they don't give anymore is the opportunity to climb Mount Picchu that overlooks Machu Picchu. You can't do that anymore. They don't let anyone do that anymore. So I went, and you know how things go wrong. We got there late at night. It was dark. We didn't get enough sleep. The next morning, I didn't get a good breakfast. And I was considering not climbing because the circumstances weren't perfect. I didn't have the big American breakfast that I thought I was going to have, right? So it was like, and I remember thinking like, well, you might not get another shot. Halfway up the mountain, I went into hemoglobin shock because I didn't eat. All I had was coffee, crackers, and jelly. One of the gentlemen who was climbing with me had some cookies in his bag with some coca leaves. He's like, look, man, you need to defibrillate your lungs, get some more oxygen, and have some sugar, get your blood right. So ate the cookie, chewed on the coca leaves. Somebody's like, the coca leaves? Like, yes, these are the leaves they make cocaine out of. And so the indigenous people, because it's high altitude, they would chew the leaves to defibrillate their lungs and get more oxygen in with higher altitude. And so that's one of the things I needed to do because I was just having a hard time. I probably would have tested positive for cocaine when I came back. Thank God they didn't test me, right? They're like, what were you down there in Peru doing, right? So I could have turned back, but I decided like I'm halfway there. And I climbed to the top, and I wish I had the picture I could show everybody. Maybe I'll put it in my story later because it's on my Instagram. I'll put it in my story later. And I got this opportunity, this experience, this once-in-a-lifetime experience to look from the top of that mountain down on Machu Picchu. And I think when people don't push themselves, they don't understand when you say it was a spiritual experience. Anyway, I always remember that picture because there was so much resistance to me getting to the top of that mountain. And when we came down, we had to check out. They had a writing system where you sign in and you sign out. And at the end of the day, if there was a signature missing, they knew somebody may have failed or somebody got lost. And they would know they need to send us a search party. This might be why the mountain's closed now. So when I got down, there was an older gentleman and his wife, and he was staring up at the mountain. And I was coming out, kind of had like this wooden shrine over the area of the gateway where you walk to the pathway for the mountain. And I was walking out of this pathway, and he looked at me and he said, "Excuse me, did you just climb Mount Machu Picchu?" And I say, "I did." He said, "Can I ask you to share your experience with me right now?" And I looked around. I said, "Well, I guess I can." And I started to tell him. He says, "No, give me the details." He said, "See, you don't understand. As a young man, I came here, and I said I was going to climb that mountain, but I never came back. This is my first time back in all these years, and now I can't climb this mountain." His eyes began to water. He's like, "And I just want to hear your experience of it. I just want to know what it was like for you." So we went and sat down, and I began to share my experience of climbing this mountain. I told him how I went into hemoglobin shock, and when I finished, she was crying. I asked him how old he was, 69 years old at the time. White gentleman from the States who had promised himself he was going to do something that he never did. Because I'm sure as life was going, he didn't put any urgency on it. "Linnell, why do you do the things that you do?" "Because when I'm 69, if for some reason I don't have the same physical capacity, if for some reason like I can't move, if for some reason I can't walk, I can smile and talk about the experiences I had because I met them with urgency." I met them with urgency. All too often, what happens is that it takes an external crisis for the urgency to kick in. It takes the loss of a job. All of a sudden, my phone rings and I'll get the person who says, I need coaching, Linnell. I need to hire you because I lost my job and I don't know what to do with my life. Crisis. All too often, many of us will go to the doctor's appointment, get the results, and everything needs to change because now we're in crisis. Many of us were told, if you don't change this, the only thing that will change it is a surgery. Now I'm in crisis. Many of us, we know what we're supposed to do financially. I'm supposed to save. I'm supposed to pay attention to what's coming in and what's going out. But we don't take a look until we're in financial crisis. Like, I don't want to sit down and listen to my husband share with me why he's leaving or what's wrong until he's leaving and the relationship is in crisis. Before that, I never had time to listen to him. Hey, babe, I want to talk to you about this. It's like, I don't know. But now I'm leaving. What's going on? Why you leaving? Now I got time because the relationship is in crisis. Now I'm willing to listen to her because the relationship is in crisis. Now I'm willing to pray because my spiritual life is in crisis. And the problem is we wait for the external crisis, the external chaos to get into a mode of urgency. But what if instead of waiting for the crisis, instead of waiting for chaos, you made it an urgent matter today? What if it was urgent just the way it is today? Whenever I'm going into a new organization, I'm working with the CEO or members of the C-suite, and they want to make a change in the organization, or there's a new CEO that's going into an organization, and in order for the organization to survive, the CEO knows we need urgent change. Like, I'll get a phone call. And there's three things that we work on, and this is what I want to give you as we close today. Like, how do you overcome procrastination? This is how. Clear urgency is the antidote to procrastination. You can't procrastinate on something that you know is urgent. So here's what we do with leaders. I'm working with a leader right now. Came in 2022. We're 2 years in. 2 years into the work. And what we know is the work we're doing today won't be fully realized until 2026. See, this is the problem. Like, if you're a leader right now, you're listening to me, you're running an organization, one of the biggest problems is most leaders don't call me until they're in crisis. And then they want it to change immediately. And when we should be urgent, when there should be urgency about what's going on, is when we can actually sniff and smell that something, if this doesn't change, the crisis will happen. But almost everybody waits until we're in crisis. Nobody talks about peace until we're at war. So when we go into an organization, there are three things that we take a look at. And these are the same three things that I believe will support you in bringing urgency to your life. The three things we look at is, number one, culture. You want to write these down. The culture of the organization. Number two, communication. How does the organization communicate within itself? And also, what is the organization communicating to their customer? And then number three, the organization's leadership. Now, when you think about culture, one of the ways to think about culture is the experience you have when you engage. Like if you're an employee, the experience you have when you engage with other employees. That's culture. Now, if we're going to make this personal in terms of how you overcome procrastination, right now, I want you to think about the experience you have when you engage with yourself. What is your personal culture? Are you satisfied? Like if you worked for yourself, would you be satisfied? Like if what you feel on a daily basis without alcohol, without drugs, like what you feel on a daily basis, like your normal way of being, like, are you satisfied? Do you feel good? That's your culture. That's your personal culture. Like, can you be alone with yourself, all by yourself, or do you need noise? Like, I remember I dated a woman years ago. You walk into her house, there's always music just going. Like, why is it you always get no? I love music. No, you don't like being with yourself. You're avoiding something. You got a culture of noise or a culture of silence? Like, how does it work for you? What is it like when you're fully engaged with yourself? Do you like yourself? What's your personal culture? Because here's the thing, if you don't, consider that it's a matter of urgency to transform the culture, to transform yourself. This is what we do when we go into organizations. Like we get a litmus test on the culture. And I tell the CEO, I don't want to talk to the big leaders, right? Because they all going to say everything's fine. Everything's good. We've been doing great work, Linnell. I want to talk to the person on the front line. Give me a group of them. What is it like to come to work every day? Oh, let me tell you. Uh-oh, the culture's broken. And then when you do the report out to the C-suite leaders, they're like, huh? What? Because they haven't checked in. Are you checking in with yourself? Are you doing a self-evaluation on your personal culture? Have you asked people, what is it like to be with me? You like being with me? Do I take the air out the room? Might not like the answers. Some folks trying to figure out, why don't I get invited to the parties? It might be your personal culture. People don't want to take peace in it. Number two is communication. How does the organization communicate within itself? How do you communicate to yourself? Are you driving a sense of urgency? Do you talk to yourself in an empowered way? Maybe one of the reasons why there's no urgency is because you're always telling yourself you can't do it anyway. I mean, what sense does it make? Somebody right now, inside voice, I mean, what sense does it make to be urgent when you know you can't do it? So the next thing we look at is communication. How are leaders communicating with the people in the organization? How are you communicating with yourself? How are you communicating with your family? One of the models I have that I share with the Slay Your Goals members and clients is a model around personal integrity, creative integrity. And one of the things that I share in this model is how we need to always be evaluating the integrity of our personal communication, both verbal, what I say, and mental, what I say. See, some of us, we're handicapping ourselves because when it comes down to how we communicate with ourselves, it's completely disempowering. It's almost impossible for you to have a sense of urgency because of how you communicate with yourself. Or you might just be telling yourself, you got time. You got time. Don't worry about it. Oh, my goodness, you feel like that? You should turn him off because he's not making us feel good right now. That type of communication. Number 2, communication. Number 1, culture. What is your personal culture? Number 2, communication. The second thing we go into organizations and we look at is communication. Like, how are you all communicating with one another? Number 3 is then we assess the leadership. Does the leadership of this company actually drive true accountability? If you're going to translate that to yourself, like, does your personal leadership actually drive you to be accountable for what you do? Isn't it fascinating how people want to lead other folks and can't even lead themselves? You can't even get yourself to eat right, but you want to teach nutrition. Like, and this is kind of how it goes, right? Like, I was having a conversation with somebody about, they were like, yeah, man, so-and-so wants to train me. I'm like, well, you going to train me? Look at you. And I'm like, well, that seems wise. How you going to lead me in an area that you're struggling in? Like, some of this is common sense. You wonder why your spiritual life is all jacked up, but then, like, you know, your pastor has spiritual problems. Well, you don't understand. That's my culture. That's my community. I've always gone there. You're going to wait until the church is in crisis to figure out where to go next. You're going to wait until things get chaotic. You're going to wait until it's externally driven, or you're going to trust what you feel inside and take the internal urgency and say, oh, no, I need another spiritual mentor. I need another spiritual leader. Leadership. Are you able to lead yourself? When it comes to how you speak to yourself, are you speaking to yourself in the way that you know you should? When it comes to how you nourish yourself, like, we all know that exercise is paramount. Are you able to lead yourself down that path? Because if not, then consider that you need leadership development. Well, no, I don't lead people. You lead you. Ultimately, urgency comes from the heart. What's inside of you? What is it that you know you're supposed to do? What is it that you know supposed to be done? Years ago, I had the opportunity to have a mentor. I remember towards the end of our relationship, I used to kind of say, well, do I need to meet with him? I'm so happy I kept the commitment, because by the time I turned 29, he passed away. And sometimes we think we got time. Oh, I'll join Slay Your Goals, eventually. Oh, I'll go to Ghana. Linnell there'll be a 2025 trip. But we don't consider how fragile life is. I don't know if I'm going to be here. You don't know if you're going to be here. I don't know if I'm going to be well. You don't know if you're going to be well. I was having a conversation with a gentleman I was having lunch with, runs this leadership organization. He was asking me about my story, and I was telling him about my mentor. And it hit me. He says, wow, you worked with him for almost 6 years. What kept you going? And I said, what kept me going was I knew he had something that I needed. Now at the age of 47, almost 20 years later, after he's passed away, I realized that even then I didn't know how bad I needed it. And I'm so happy that I kept a sense of urgency, personal urgency. Because sometimes we think, I'm just going to pause right now. I'll go back next year. But what if now is all you've got? What if now is the factor? What if now is the time? What if you wait another week, it just won't be there? Hey, my inspired peoples, Linnell Harris here, certified ontological coach and trainer. I'm so excited that you're watching the channel. By the way, did you know you can catch the show live at 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. every Sunday morning? You can. All you have to do is go to my Facebook stream, Coach Linnell Harris, catch the stream live, or you can listen to the radio show via iHeart at WVON 1690 AM. But since you're here, if you love the content, I ask that you share it, like this particular video, and subscribe to the channel. I hope you're having a great day.